actually very, very difficult to follow from some amazing speakers today who have touched upon a lot of what I'm also going to talk in this presentation. This research has come across after maybe 2.5 or nearly 3 years of effort. So I have to thank a lot of people who participated in this research as well. And of course, a lot of people who work behind the scenes to help me develop this research, like Mohammed himself with his background as well. We've already spoken a lot because the talk was about the future of customer experience today. And it's no sort of surprise, basically, that there are um, traditional approaches which organizations are following, and there are customer experience centric approaches which organizations are following. So, what I'll be doing today is just deep diving a little bit into that approach, and then how, based on following a customer experience centric approach, how do you actually change from an organization perspective? Because just in the panel discussion as well, Hans and Armin actually showed us how it's different in a startup world, how it's different in an established organization to actually manage the changes which will result in better customer experience. So that's what I'll talk about. And then, of course, not all organizations are at that level of maturity to be absolutely managing this well. Some organizations are doing this better than the others. What are the things which actually qualitatively differentiate one organization from the other, which I'll show in some of the stages of customer experience management, which is outcome of this research as well, and then open to some question and answers basically at the end of it. So, like I said, it's no surprise that customer experience is delivering growth. Organizations which are being more and more experience led are seeing the benefits of this compared to organizations which remain narrow product centric organizations. And that's shown in lots of stats, but one of them is around returns to stakeholders. And those stakeholders, by the way, may not be just the FTSE or NASDAQ sort of shareholders. Basically, that's why I picked one example which is very close to my heart when I always talk about customer experience, is this company called Richer Sounds, where the stakeholders actually are the employees themselves. Most of the employees only actually own that business. It's a small store-led business. Does have some digital presence, but remained very, very store-led on the high streets here in the UK, which is selling high-tech equipment, televisions, basically, where people like to come, touch and feel, see how it will look in their house, and with knowledgeable experts in their store. And that organization has grown against the tide of Amazons who have come in the world and just wiped out big businesses like Comet over here in the UK. Of course, I just mentioned Booking.com, another great example of how they are also continuously improving experience to deliver success. And the examples can go on and on. Nike, Cisco, we spoke to 3 organizations already today, Volvo Group, Super Retail Group, as well as Driverly. They are also experience-led businesses from whatever I heard today in the presentations, and that's why they are successful in their businesses. Now, of course, this experience-led growth is there for some organizations, but some organizations still continue to follow a traditional approach. And what would that customer experience centricity actually mean? So again, because doing this from an academic perspective, I had to look into the literature and theory, etc., in this space. So there are a lot of definitions, but I'm going to keep it very, very simple for everybody. Distilling from all the theory in this place, in this space, basically, we define customer experience centricity to be serving customer journeys by understanding their needs, behaviors, and fulfilling them. And this definition is actually derived from multiple concepts, which is around customer orientation. And of course, academics debate a lot about these small words and terms, whether it's market orientation, which is looking at your competition and just adapting to your competition and the market. or customer centricity, where a famous person called Peter Drucker who says, "Customer who determines what a business is itself and what it should it would produce." So we adapt from all of these definitions to call customer experience centricity to be more journey based, behavior led, like we learned in the talks today, and then trying to fulfill those aspirations for the customers. The difference between a that traditional approach which I was talking about earlier and a customer experience centric approach would be being very, very oriented to short term profit mindset, or be oriented to that next transaction or that next interaction only. And all of us as consumers have witnessed these businesses. We know some of them when we sometimes speak to the call centers of some of those businesses. We have seen that, and I'll illustrate that with an interesting personal example as well. uh, and the organizations which actually think of you not just for that transaction, but look at you at that whole from a journey perspective, and are oriented more towards long-term growth and sustained loyalty. And this is not just true for B2C businesses, but it is absolutely true for B2B businesses as well, who look at the end-to-end value chain of their business customers, and not just at uh, those specific businesses, to be oriented in that direction. Um, so as I mentioned, I'm going to take you through something interestingly. Brian just showed an example from the 1970s of his earliest memory of customer experience, but I'm going to show you my most latest memory of customer experience, and I had to live through this experience, which is about leasing a car. We spoke about cars, autonomous vehicles, etc., and I call this modern digital life is goodish, very easy. I switched my car after 10 years, by the way, because I came into the London's, ultra low emission zone. It was a oil diesel car, which couldn't be run here in this zone. So this time I decided to purchase a car in a slightly different way from how I did it maybe 10 years back, where I, went to that car dealer and then, spoke to that quintessential car salesman, uh, compared many options, look at the finances, etc. There was a finance provider there in the dealership itself, and then took many days, deliberated over this, my decisions, and then bought the car. But this time, actually, I thought, okay, let's go to try to lease a car, and I started my journey actually from a leasing aggregator. I'm not going to name any of these businesses, name or shame any of the businesses, but yeah, it was a simple smooth journey who pointed me to a broker, got a decent deal. They did all the paperwork for the financier. I had no interaction, by the way, with the car dealer, with the finance provider, absolutely nothing. I just got the delivery of the vehicle. That's why I call this, modern digital life is goodish. However, 6 days into this lease, the car broke down. This is where sort of the the not so goodish part of the customer journey started for me, where I had to start dealing with absolutely those people who I never knew even who existed: the financier, the car dealers, a breakdown agent who the OEM had outsourced um, the recovery to, and then eventually, because the car had broken down and couldn't be repaired, rental firm as well, who was given the job to source a replacement vehicle because the car being in a warranty. And all those seven contact centers, most of us have dealt with call centers. Everyone had their own departments, own services. In fact, the worst experience I would say I had from the car rental firm, who just promised that the car is arriving and it never arrived for many hours, and I had to keep switching between the local rental firm and the central rental firm's contact center, and none of the experiences matched what you would expect from a basic service, basically when your car breaks down during a warranty, and forget about the emotion part of the experience where it's, you bought a car just 6 days in, and you were driving down the M11, having enjoying the drive in a new vehicle, and it just broke down with this experience. So the reason I want to illustrate this is we just spoke about those KPIs, etc. So when I was sort of waiting where I eventually landed, um, with this academic background, I started writing a little bit of an essay, and that started sounding like a rant basically of what I'm writing. So then I just cooled down and started empathizing with each of these providers, and figured out that if I really look a little bit deeper into each of these providers, I could see that each of them were working with a narrow, if you can, if you want to call it KPI, or a narrow incentive basically, as to how to quickly close down the service, let's say, or how to quickly, complete my recovery within this X minutes of time, or how not to actually, even get a car into the garage, basically, which is what the most of the dealerships were trying to actually do. Interestingly, some of the people like the financier had absolutely no clue how to deal with this situation, and it had to be escalated to a level that right now I'm still living this experience, where it has ended up with cancellation of the lease, basically. But I'll take you through this example when I come to the frameworks as well, to showcase how each of these organizations uh, focused on some narrow elements, but did not focus on some of the other elements which could have been important. Uh, Looking at that example, as you may have obviously understood, that managing this customer experience, whether it's from that emotion perspective, whether it's from the sensorial perspective, or whether it's from fulfilling the journey, the basics perspective, also is not easy for any of these organizations at all. And that's why there is a need um, for a different way of approaching customer experience itself, which is not just about pouring in the investments. There is a lot of investment going in this area, but the value derived from from these investments is not that high. As you can see, just 22% of the leaders say that the customer experience efforts actually exceed customer expectations, which very interestingly, Brian also touched upon that. Are you meeting your customer expectations? Are you changing as fast as your customer experience expectations? And that's something that we've seen with a lot of scenarios as well. So the challenge that we see, and going back to the same example, that most of the organizations are actually falling into the trap of the measures. Fortunately, in today, all of the panelists almost agreed unanimously that these measures like NPS, or a single metric score, or even a multi-point scale is not actually always useful. They may be useful in signaling uh, the direction that the organization may be going in, but they are not useful in providing some tangible actions that the organizations actually need to take. And therefore, in this study, what we have done is we have applied a very interesting study which was called mundanity of excellence. This was a interesting research done on Olympic level swimmers, from beginner level up to the Olympic level. And what this study found out, and derived as a theory which is called mundanity of excellence, is that uh, hours of practice actually were not making a difference for children to move from one level to the next level in their journey towards becoming, let's say, an Olympic level swimmer. Instead, smaller changes, mundane attributes like turning up on time for practice, enjoying the hard practice during their swimming, or focusing on some of the styles of strokes, for example, and those focusing on some of those styles of strokes is something that the theory calls techniques. We call that in our theory mastery of customer experience management methods. Um, Focusing on building the discipline within swimming itself, which is what we call, integrated customer experience capabilities. And what this actually means, again, drawing on back from the theory, is uh, aligning all of your methods and techniques that you've learned basically into a discipline. So I may become a champion, let's say, a breaststroke swimmer, which would be my eventual capability where I'm going to actually win. But some of the tools and techniques that I'm going to use to become that are going to be common across um, capabilities. And finally, the big one, which of course a lot of people talk about, customer experience centric culture, the culture within the organization. We call this actually attitudes, and this is an inversion of attitude from being traditional, following that traditional approach of product or service centricity towards moving towards customer experience centricity. In the analogy with the swimmers study, which is mundanity of excellence, they look at attitudes like what I mentioned, enjoying hard practice or setting difficult goals for the swimmers themselves made a difference. So those are the type of smaller details which made a difference compared to, some numbers or measures of how many times you've done practice, etc., which made a big difference. So we are drawing from that theory into the world of business, uh, and saying that these are the attributes which are going to make a difference. So we went on a big journey ourselves as a researcher to find out what those smaller details are within these sort of categories, whether it's within the attitudes that an organization exhibits or the capabilities that an organization has around customer experience or the methods and tools and techniques that they follow. So next, what I'm going to show you, because the study is called smaller details, so brace yourself for looking at very, very smaller, mundane attributes which make a difference within each of these categories. And I'll start basically by also, of course, sorry, forgot to mention that this is coming from, and I have to thank all of the participants. And in fact, Brian was one of the participants, as you heard him. Very, very similar profile people, 50 people with, greater than 1,000 years of experience across industries, across sectors, B2B, B2C, geographies, India, Australia, the US, UK, UAE, Belgium. I mean, you name it, most of the countries, people were from those countries as well, and sectors, whether it's retail, financial services, even the head of catering of a business, as well was involved in this with this type of role profile, were involved in helping find out these smaller details. And I'm going to get into those smaller details which are built around those categories, attitudes, capabilities, and methods. Uh, so starting with the attitudes itself, here, what's interesting is that some of these attitudes may just sound like, softer cultural aspects, and they are, of course, some of them are, but some of those implicit mindsets are exhibited by organizations with explicit approaches. So we just divided them into some implicit mindsets and explicit approaches. Same with the journey management capabilities. Some are the capabilities which are exposed in terms of touch points, or some businesses like to call them channels, um, and communication, how you communicate with your customers. Uh, and the inherent capabilities are actually the people behind those capabilities, whether they are the skill sets coming from actual humans, or it could be, the AI competency as well, because that's where the world is moving right now. And finally, the tools and techniques. We just listened to in the panel, one of the tactics and digital tactics which Armin is applying, for example, is change agility. Agility tactics are being applied. Design techniques, we just saw the design thinking techniques which uh, Hans is applying basically. So those design techniques which are important, and they may be coming from any discipline, but what are the types of techniques which are useful? And of course, a big thing is the data savviness within the organization as to what to measure, how to measure, when to measure, which are the attributes which are important. Those come from data savviness within the organization. So there are attributes around these areas. So the next, what I'm going to show you, and I'm not going to deep dive into each and every individual smaller detail. I'll leave that for the questions. Some we touched upon in the uh, panel discussion, but I'll illustrate those smaller details with one case study exhibit from these organizations that I spoke to, which will make it a much more easier rather than just the theoretical list of smaller details which you see. But I'll just show you the just for a quick preview. Uh, so, like I said, the implicit mindsets, if you see in an organization where the mindset is that customer experience is a differentiator, that is matched by an explicit approach of actually allocating resource by customer experience journey. I have seen in my experience businesses who just pay lips experience, but then actually don't invest or don't allocate resource to those customer experience journeys itself. Uh, and the same with the incentives. We just discussed about KPIs. So the explicit approach has to showcase that there are incentives which are again aligned with data, not just incentives made on pieces of paper, sometimes from a top-down perspective, but actually by understanding the data. So will not, like I said, I'm not going to go into each and every smaller detail. We'll probably need to run a workshop for that in if anybody is interested. Uh, Same with the touchpoint integration and communication. Integration, the keyword here is integration, because organizations, again, for in the market orientation tactics, multiple times they just open up a channel because that's the famous and popular thing to do, but they are not sometimes integrated back into the organization. So it's important that those touch points are integrated. And the same with communication. How many times we've received communication which in fact very much similar. How was your experience? Absolutely. From my own journey, multiple times I got those surveys and experiences. How was it? Rate us 1 to 10, etc., which absolutely were not relevant in my case. So relevant communication, which is enabled based on the customer context, needs to be there as part of some of the smaller details. And same with the skill sets and competencies which need to be changed. We discussed a lot about you know customer experience. I think we discussed a less. I think there were questions about the skills which are needed, which is absolutely the right questions that need to be answered within organizations as well. And these skills are not just within the organizations for employees, but also customer skills. I know that there was one question on how will customers adopt to this new model of insurance, for example. So it needs different types of skill sets and mindsets for customers to participate in those type of services and capabilities. Diversity, Hans mentioned about diversity. Uh, it's absolutely important because diverse teams will make sure that the customers who are themselves diverse, their needs are actually met. If you don't have diverse teams, this is something which came up in the study with multiple participants actually mentioning this. They were introducing so many times they missed on journeys for people who are neurodiverse, and they were introducing that. So there are organizations who are introducing this as well, and several forms of diversity as well in the experience. And finally, the methods which I just mentioned around design techniques. We heard a lot about the design techniques in the innovation which Volvo Group is following. Very, very similar approaches on applying research and experimentation or finding the paths of least friction are applicable. I spoke about tracing outcomes to actions in that data savviness, but the usual stuff of making make insight led decision and actions is quite important rather than just go by some surveys, etc. And the advanced nature of data savviness is where you can predict performance measures as well, not just uh, create performance measures. We just spoke about in the panel as well about the measures by which the startups are evaluated. If they can be predictive, where they keep changing and adapting themselves, is something which advanced organizations are doing as well. And finally, of course, the digital tactics on not just the change agility that I touched upon earlier, but finding those automation opportunities to deliver universal service. which is something I think Brian touched upon as well, in terms of finding the automation so that the people can have more time to have the conversations with customers as well, will be very, very beneficial. Um, what I'll do is next very quickly try to paint a picture with an example of an organization which is following some of these smaller details and finding success. And the best part is that that organization, when I spoke to that organization, they themselves did not know that they are quite mature. So it's quite an interesting case study because they were in that maturing phase. Um, I'm going to call them QuickBite. It's a cloud.ai generated pseudonym for this case, but basically it's a fast food business, which is quite popular. I would say globally, quite popular. So no points for guessing if you can guess it, but let's look at what they actually did. So first of all, just painting that journey. Most of the people who go through a fast food experience, actually their journey starts from craving for that type of food, and then considering, okay, which outlet to actually go to, placing an order, and typically collecting and consuming that very, very quickly, and then thinking, okay, will I revisit, or will I be guilty about having that fast food in my personal case as well. Interestingly, what the business did was, first of all, created value streams which were customer journey based, where they merged up what is called attract and retain. So rather than having a separate loyalty part of the business, which is very standard practice in a lot of businesses to have a loyalty or customer retention team, the attract and retain team value stream is actually the same. And that's where, when somebody is craving or fancying fast food, like while I was driving down the M11 and probably may have been craving fast food as a customer action, uh, the business enabled the touch point. So one of the smaller details which I mentioned was touch point enablement, by providing coverage of the outlets. Of course, you need those physical outlets, especially down the motorway, but they started to partner with the aggregators, which are Uber Eats and Deliveroo. And while they were themselves building their app, given the fact that most of the customers were actually starting their journeys on digital channels, they partnered with the aggregators to gain more insights, to make decisions of how to change the journey, and adapted, like I said, the resource allocation towards those channels apart from just the physical stores in this part of the journey. Next, what the business actually did from a smaller details perspective, in the consideration part of the journey from the customer's perspective, is, okay, I am fancying, let's say, quick bite. I have decided to make that choice. They introduced a digital kiosks instead of people walking and queuing up into the front counters, so that people in a rush have the convenience. And biggest insight that they got was, they are not judged on the portion sizes or the type of food that they are having. Like I mentioned, the guilty feeling that you have when you go through these fast food outlets. Uh, and another design attribute which they applied was modeling the customer needs with business goals, where the digital kiosks actually were both were convenient for the customers as well as being cost effective for the business. But the main thing that the business did, which I touched upon earlier, was introduce a digitally savvy leadership, because the previous executives in the business were more oriented towards the store model of the business, where the objective was just expand the number of stores, or improve the brand equity of the business. But here, introducing the digitally savvy leadership, who sponsored the CX and digitalization agenda, was absolutely key to improving this digital part of the journey during that consideration journey for this value stream. Of course, that sponsorship touched upon every part of the customer journey as well, which I'll move on to, which is the next one, which is on order. Here, the value stream was called omni-channel order and pay. This is about whether you're coming through a digital kiosk or an app or an aggregator. It's much more seamless to to go through that order. And multiple, like I mentioned, multiple of those smaller details were applied over here um, as well. Uh, Moving on a little bit swiftly, because I think we are a bit hard pressed for time, is on the next, which is fulfillment promise. This is something which is the smaller details in this area are a bit less visible to the customer actions, where you're going just to pick up the order. But internally within the business, AI is applied extensively to forecast that just-in-time cooking of the food. Because normally the food preparation takes 10 to 15 minutes, but the customers are expecting their orders to almost be completed within 1 or 2 minutes. So the chefs are assisted by the automation, and staff can also shift focus from taking the orders to actually fulfilling the service. So that was a change which happened in this part of the value stream. uh, and what this did basically for the business was orders went up from a digital perspective, and even the average order values on the digital kiosks increased. And finally, of course, now the business is focusing on revisit and how to find those nuggets of data to prevent wastage, increase accuracy, the usual um, challenges that such a business basically has. So that sort of demonstrates a business which is following these smaller details to make a difference, not just for the customers, but also from a business outcomes perspective. As I mentioned earlier, that the next part of this presentation is about stages of customer experience management. Because again, going back to the theory of sport being qualitatively distinct and this stratification is discrete. So from the data, we derived stages basically, and there could be more granular stages, to be very honest, but five discrete stages which move from siloed businesses up to culture driven businesses based on the level of integration across the attitudes, capabilities, and methods business exhibits, uh, based on the patterns that we saw in the data. And I'm going to show you some of the patterns based on these integrations of the goals, just some descriptive statistics on how a lot of businesses actually assess to intentional, which is a great sign, I would say, because most of the businesses are trying to make a difference in customer experience. They are still in that intentional stage rather than being, data enabled or reactive. But yes, there were a lot of businesses which were culture driven. For example, the business that I gave an example of, but they were having diverse range of customer experience goals which continuously are changing. So for example, customer immediacy was a common goal across B2B and B2C firms. Adoption and conversion and retention, because retention was sometimes mostly achieved in B2B firms based on our data. Finally, moving on to the takeaways, like I mentioned, businesses are moving towards customer experience centricity to secure long-term growth and sustained loyalty. Delivering on customer experience is challenging, but is a differentiator. And smaller details is what I've introduced today, is a new comprehensive approach, so that organizations can be qualitatively distinct in managing customer experience rather than having the best NPS score. So thank you, everyone.